Hello and welcome to 60s Science Espionage. My name is Genevieve Kaplan and I am the Director of Education here at the 6th Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. In the 1960s, the entire world was focused on the Cold War, the escalating of tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union and the allies of each of those countries as communism began to spread around the world. The United States and its allies were intent on trying to contain communism, whereas the Soviet Union was working with other countries to help build their communist governments. These countries included China, as well as Cuba, and created some very major issues for President Kennedy and the United States government during the 1960s. Espionage was one way that the two countries were able to keep tabs on each other and try to make sure that they always knew what the other one was planning. There was a variety of types of espionage that were being used, anything from secret recording devices to spies and double agents, use of planes like the U-2 planes that ended up causing some major embarrassment for President Eisenhower's administration just months before President Kennedy was elected to office, as well as a whole variety of interesting James Bond-like inventions. James Bond books and movies were not only something that fascinated people who watched them and read them around the world, but they actually served as inspiration for different types of spying mechanisms and materials and resources that spies could use in real life. The CIA actually took some of its inspiration for some of the tools that it gave to its spies from those James Bond movies. One particular type of espionage that I always find fascinating is the use of animals. There were pigeons that would have cameras attached to them so that they could be flying high over a particular location and be able to capture images without really being noticed, because how many of us really take much notice to specific birds in the sky? Another particularly interesting animal espionage invention was the invention of what would be, or what had hoped to be actually, a cat that could be used as a listening device. This project was one that went on for a few years and cost about $25 million. The use of a cat as a listening device is actually rather ingenious. Many people are not going to pay attention to a stray cat that's walking through a park, and that's exactly what was the inspiration behind coming up with this idea. After spending about $25 million on this project, the inventors were able to put a microphone into the cat's ear and were able to embed a device that would allow for the signal to be transmitted. They even wove wiring through the cat's fur so that way the cat would be completely inconspicuous. The trouble was that the first time that the cat was released to try and test this out by going to listen to two men talking in a park, the cat attempted to cross the street and was unfortunately struck by a taxi cab and killed. So the invention of a cat as a listening device never actually went fully into realization. One of the major events that happened in the 1960s was a back and forth between the United States and the Soviet Union over spying that was done by each. On May 1st of 1960, Gary Powers, a U.S. pilot, was shot down in his U-2 plane while flying high over the Soviet Union. Powers was captured, and the Soviets accused the United States of spying. Initially, the United States denied it. However, the Soviet Union then produced photographs of Powers in Russia And the President of the United States at the time, Dwight Eisenhower, was forced to admit that yes, that the United States was spying. However, the United States, a few weeks after Gary Powers was shot down, accused the Soviet Union of spying themselves. A few weeks after Gary Powers was shot down, the United States produced evidence accusing the Soviets of spying on them. They produced a large replica seal of the United States that during a 1952 security sweep of the United States Embassy in Moscow was discovered that this seal actually contained a listening device. Several hundred more listening devices were then discovered during sweeps of United States embassies in the Soviet Union and some of the communist bloc countries. The Soviets very much joked about the props that were presented and basically intimated that these props were from a play and were asking, when does this play open? However, it goes to show how much back and forth the two countries were doing in terms of espionage. A couple of years later, the U-2 planes would serve to be an essential tool for President Kennedy and his administration as the U-2 planes flew over Cuba and photographed Soviet missiles inside of Cuba. This ended up leading to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was a very tense 13-day negotiation between the United States and Russia over the spread of nuclear weapons and missiles, especially the placement of Soviet missiles in Cuba. Some of the devices that were developed for the Cold War looked at encryption. Encryption is a way that you are able to take messages and encode them so that other people cannot decipher them. Encryption is something that we use today when we are transmitting secret or private information that we don't want to share. You may sometimes notice little boxes or notices on your computer talking about, do you want to encrypt this information, or that information has been encrypted and it will be protected for your safety. This is particularly relevant today as we are seeing numerous hacking attempts taking place. In 2020, most famously, there was a large scandal involving the Russian government being accused of hacking into information sources in the United States. Encryption devices in the 1960s included items such as the Soviet encryption machine called Fialka. Fialka is the word for violet in Russian. Fialka was very similar to what the Nazis used in World War II, the Enigma machine, to encode messages. And the way that the Fialka worked was that you would type in information just as you would as though you were typing into almost a typewriter. And then there were several wheels that would go and take that information, take each letter, and simultaneously change it to another number. And then almost like flipping a switch, it would then recode the information once again. And then all of that information that you had typed in would be printed out as a series of holes on cards that would be spit out, and then to translate it, they could be put into a machine that automatically decoded the messages. Where the Enigma machine operated with maybe 3 of these wheels that would change the information, the Fialka operated with 10. And that made the Russian messages incredibly difficult for the United States and its allies to be able to interpret. However, one of the things that has been said about encrypted information and some of the major code breaks that have happened dealing with machines like the Fialka is that frequently breaks in coding systems happen just by accident or by information being stolen. And that happened both with the Russians stealing or accidentally uncovering different encryption codes from the United States, and the United States did the same thing. The Fialka was an incredibly valuable tool for the Soviets, and it created over 500 trillion codes, making it incredibly difficult for it to be broken. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at a couple of different coding systems so that you can try your hand at coding a message and uncoding them. After that, we'll talk about a fun way that you can take your secret messages and pretend as though you were a spy with some of your friends or family and do a dead drop, which we'll talk about in just a little while. One of the first types of encoding and encrypting that we're going to do is using the Cipher Wheel. The Cipher Wheel is a really simple coding system that just uses the alphabet, but you can also switch it out with numbers, which we'll talk about as soon as we have encoded a couple of messages ourselves. So the Cipher Wheel basically looks like this. You have two circles. Each circle has the full alphabet going in one direction, and then they are slightly starting at a different location so that each time the letters don't equal or they don't match up. What we've done for our Cipher Wheels, we have this large outer wheel, and then we printed a second copy and cut it out for the smaller wheel so that when we line these up, they will all perfectly line up, and we now have a great coding system. And you can find these on the internet, all sorts of places, but we'll put a link into the description below as to where you can actually go to print one of these Cipher Wheels out. So with our Cipher Wheel, what we will do is we're going to create a coded message. The original message that we have that we are trying to translate into something that people won't be able to understand is represented by the letters on the outer wheel, that bigger wheel. So what we're going to do, I have a demonstration set up right here, is we have D equals R. And what that means is that D is always going to refer to the letter on the bigger wheel that we are going to line up with the letter from the little wheel. So with D equals R, we're going to find the D on the big wheel and the R on the little wheel. Now what we can do is go through and find the letters for each of our code words and translate them into that coded message. So let me go ahead, and I'm going to get my marker, and just to make sure that nothing moves, I'm just going to put a little piece of tape to hold it there, and another one just to hold it up so that now everybody can see what our code system is. So what we're going to do is we are going to translate the word code, C-O-D-E, into a secret message. So as we just did, we've lined up the D and the R, and now we need to find each letter from C, O, D, and E and write its corresponding code message. So if we go to the outer circle, we can find the C, and the letter that's directly underneath it is a Q. So our first letter in our coded message is going to be Q. Now we move to the O. We go around here. We find the O lines up with the C. Now the D, come back up here. And that one's kind of easy since it starts our code off. And then we go to the E, which matches up with the S. So now if you wanted to send a message Using that encrypted word, you would use QCRS. And whoever you were sending that to, you would need to make sure that they knew that you were using D equals R. Because if they tried to pick any other random letter to start with, they're going to get a completely different message. So that's one of the reasons why there were always code books, is you needed to make sure that people were starting in the same place. And whenever there was somebody who was trying to capture information, they not only needed to capture the messages, but they had to capture those code books. They were incredibly important. If they had the keys, they would be able to translate many of your messages. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to move on to another message, and I'm going to give you the chance to do the same thing again, but we'll pick a different code and a different word, and I'll give you a little bit of time to translate it before I start walking through it. So you can see we now have Y equals G, and we're going to translate the word spies. So I'm just going to take my small cipher wheel. I'm going to find the Y and then line it up with the G. So let me put it back up here so it's easy to see. So we have the Y and the G all lined up. And now we are good to go to start coding the word spies. I'm going to start jumping in. So the first letter that we have is an S. So we'll go ahead, we'll find the S. And we have an A. Now the nice thing about this is we have an S in two places, so we've already encoded two letters. Now we'll go for the P, and that lines up with the X. The I just lines up with the Q, and the E, which lines up with the M. And now we have the word spies. And it's definitely a word that I can't pronounce. Now what we're going to do is we are going to take one of those coded messages and we are going to translate it back into an English word. So to do that, one of the things that you'll see is that we still have that we have L equals T. This still means that this is the big wheel and this is the small wheel. Except, whereas when we had the English word and we were translating it into a coded word, we started on the outside and found the match on the inside. This time, we're going to start on the inside and find the match on the outside. So, we've lined it up, so we have L equals T. And the first letter that we have is the A. So we're going to go to A, and that first letter is an S. Now we have a K. So we're going to go to the C. We'll go around to the Q, which is an I. And then we'll go to the M, which is an E. And I'm betting that you're already starting to figure out what the word is. Let's go to the V, and you have the N. And we've already translated the K before, so that's a C. And we've already translated the M before, and that's an E. So now you have the word science. What we're going to do next is we are going to do a cipher that's called a Pigpen cipher that uses some shapes that you'll recognize, but they're going to be broken apart. And once they're broken apart, they are going to become our code. And we're going to use those shapes to translate into letters to form words. And then I'll teach you a way to combine both of these to make some extra difficult coded messages. So we'll be there in just a moment. So what we have behind me are a couple of familiar looking shapes. We have a shape that is frequently called the hashtag. It used to be called years ago the pound sign or the number sign. And we have a couple of X's. These two shapes are going to help us to create a coding system that is fondly known as the Pigpen system. So the way that you are going to make the Pigpen system is you will draw two hashtags and two X's. And in each of the spaces, you're going to put in the letters of the alphabet. So you'll start off with the two hashtags and put in the alphabet. And you do need to keep them all in the same order. So that way everybody who is translating it will know that it's the same thing. So you might be looking at this thinking, okay, we've got all these letters, we have all these spaces, but how do you tell the difference between a shape for this one and a shape for this one? And same with these two. What you're going to do is for the second hashtag and the second X, you're going to add in a dot. And those are going to create the 26 separate individual looking characters. So we've got a dot here, one here, here, here. And then we're going to do the same thing down here. And this is now your coding system. So the way that this cipher works is that whenever you want to write an A, you're just going to use the lines that the A space touches. So an A would look like that. If you wanted to do an E, you'll have a box. And for an F, it will look like that. The same thing will happen over here with J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, and R, except you're going to include those dots. So the J will look like the A, but we'll have that dot in the corner. The N will have a dot right there. And then the O will have a dot like that. It almost looks like an interesting way of spelling Joe. For the bottom, you're going to do the same thing. So an S is going to look like that. A T will look like that. And a U is going to look like that. Same thing, the W will look like that with the dot. The X with the dot. And the Y with the dot. And that is the Pigpen coding system. It's actually one that, when you see it written out, looks almost like it's a different language and can be a little intimidating, but as soon as you know that translation system, it's actually really easy. So what we're going to do is we are going to translate a couple of words. And I'm going to pull this one down. This system is one that I'm going to hold up so that we have a reference point. I'm actually going to tape it up. And I'll hold it out like that. So we have two different ones that we can translate. So if we start with the word cipher, if you look, you'll find that C, and it's got that L shape. So it's like that. Then we have the I, so we go find that. So it's right here with the upside down L. And then we find a P, which is going to be right here with a dot. And the H over here, looking like a little bit like a beam bridge. The E is our square. Close that one up. And the R is over here. And now we've just translated cipher. So for that one, you'll see that we basically just worked within the hashtag area. Let's now incorporate two or three of the letters down in the X so that we can see what that looks like. So we're starting off with the W. So it's going to be a V with a dot, and then the O, the R, it's going to be right here, the D, it's right there, and the S, which is going to be that V. And there we have it. We've now translated 2 words into the Pigpen cipher system. I will say that there are a few different variations of this system. I have seen the system so that people will go and they will make one hashtag and they will write A, B, and C in the first box, D, E, F in the second, G, H, I in the third, and do that all the way through. And they get all 26 letters in here. And then they incorporate the dot system they put a dot to the far right, the far left, or the far right, the far left, and in the middle. Each one of those dots matches up with one of the 3 letters that is there on the box. And then when they write the letter, say they're going for a B, instead of a B looking like this, as we have in this code, the B would look like this with the dot square in the middle. If it was an A, the dot would be over here, and the dot would be over here for a C. So there are a couple of different variations that you need to be aware of, and if you want to play with those and try your hand at those, that is great as well. One way to even think about it, if you've seen in older telephones, they will have on their keys 3 letters per key. And it very much kind of is like that same system. And in the early days of texting, if you wanted to text, say, a B, the B would be on the number 1 button, and you would have to press that button twice to get the B. The first time it would have the A, and if you pressed it a third time, it would give you a C. So it's an interesting way to be able to tie that into early texting. So now let's go ahead and we're going to translate another message. I'm going to hold up for a second. Okay. So now I'm going to put this back up, and this time we're going to translate this into the shapes into an English word. So see, the first one we start off with the V, so we know we're going down to the X's, but there is no dot. So that first letter is going to be an S. Now we've got a box with no dot, so it'll be an E. We have that L shape with no dot, so we're going to go to the C. Now we have the beginnings of an F with a dot, so we're going over to the dot side. And we've got the R. And we've got another square, so we've already translated that. So we know it's an E. And now we've got almost like a duck's mouth. So we know we're going down to the X's, and there is no dot. So we have a T. And we've now translated from the symbols into an English word. Now, a way that you can make this even trickier, I'm going to set this down, is what would happen if you translated your word from these symbols from the Pigpen into letters that were coded, so that way you weren't automatically getting the word secret. You would be getting secret as though it was as it was translated in the Cipher Wheel. So you're doing 2 steps. And that can seem, oh, no problem, really easy. But one thing to remember is that you're so used to translating and being able to see what the word is about to turn into, so you can start making guesses as to that word. If you're translating from these symbols into a bunch of letters that don't make any sense next to each other, that's definitely going to give you a cause for pause, and might even make you think, wait a minute, I'm doing this totally wrong. But have faith in yourself and keep translating. Get all the codes translated, and then translate into the English word and see if you're right. If you're still having some issues and you're coming up with a word that doesn't make sense, go back and double check your translating at each point to make sure that you translated it into the right letter. But it definitely is a lot of fun, and something that you can do with your friends or family members as a way to test each other and be able to pass some really great secret messages that you may not want everybody around you to know. So in just a moment, I'm going to talk with you about dead drops, which are a way that you can use these coded messages and act like a real spy. We've just learned about ciphering and how to code and decode messages. Now, one of the things that you can do to put together your own espionage or spy game is to use dead drops. Dead drops were a way for people to go and share messages with each other that were almost like they were hidden in plain view. They were drops where they were passing information or materials from one person to another without there being any direct contact with each other. So an example of a dead drop might be that you need to pass a coded message on to someone else that you are working with, but you can't have anybody see you pass that message. And so you might go and find a location where you can take a little small canister perhaps, or even one way that dead drops would be used is they would have these hollow spikes that would generally be made of like plastic or metal, that the top would open up, the information could be put inside, the top could be sealed again, and then they could be pushed into the ground, or if they were using small canisters, they could be attached to a piece of metal if they were magnetized, or placed someplace very inconspicuous that nobody's going to mess with them. They aren't going to be subject to the elements. If somebody was to come along and say they were tidying up, and if we had perhaps attached a message to the back of a curtain or something like that, that if somebody opened the curtains, it's all of a sudden not going to disturb that piece of information, nor is it going to make it visible to anyone. So some common examples might be that you might have a small magnetized container. Frequently, people who do geocaching, which is where they set up coordinates that people can go and use their GPS to find a location, and there will be a small little metal canister or some other cache or place where the information is stored, that people can go and sign their name to a script or a rolled up piece of paper. that they are then able to say, I found it, but then they put it back for the next person. Well, spies wouldn't do that. They wouldn't say, hey, let's have everybody sign to say, yes, that I found this. Spies were always having to find new dead drop spaces, and they could never reuse one in case one spot was discovered, or if someone went to do a pickup at a dead drop and they were being followed and didn't know it. So they would take, say, a magnetized metal container. They would put whatever messages, or maybe it's some rolled up film from a camera, they would put it in there, and then they could place this little magnetized piece someplace that's out in the open, easily accessible, but isn't going to be disturbed. I've seen examples of these metal containers being placed to the underside of like a park bench. It's something where you could pretend to be kneeling down to tie your shoes and very quickly just place it right under the bench. Nobody's necessarily going to see it, but then the person who is coming to retrieve it knows its location, and then they're able to do the same thing. Maybe they're wrestling in a bag and they quickly go grab it and drop the little canister into their bag. And all of a sudden, they've got a successful dead drop. So one of the things that you can do with these coded messages that we have just done is that you can go and take a couple of coded messages, put them into a container, whether it is, say, a plastic bag, or maybe you tape something to the inside of a drawer. But you place these messages someplace where you can then let your friends or whomever you're playing this dead drop game with to let them know that there is a package for them to retrieve. And you can even set up a set of signals to let people know that the dead drop has been loaded, which is what they mean by it's ready to be picked up. Some ways that people have indicated that a dead drop is loaded is it may be opening or closing a specific set of curtains at a particular time. Could be leaving a mark on a mailbox, say with like some lipstick or some chalk. You have lots of different options, but something that's not necessarily permanent but isn't going to be destroyed right away. Then once you have executed your dead drop, and it's always good if you're doing one to have your friend or family member also do one, so that way you each get to experience creating a dead drop and then retrieving the objects, and then go ahead and decode what messages they've left for you. That way you get the experience of being a spy, participating in espionage, and sharing a great message with a friend. Thank you so much for joining us today for 60s Science Espionage. We hope that you've enjoyed this program and that you will come join us next month, where we will be looking at early computers. We will have a special guest from the Texas Instruments Alumni Association, Max Post, who will be working with us to talk about the early computers and run some experiments to show you different components that were required to build parts of a computer. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at the next 60 Science.